Okay guys, like I said, I'm going to unbox it because I just got it. Breaking the seal. Razor blade. Before I even run it, I'm tearing this thing completely apart and seeing what's compatible with the old one. Got me the stock regular Revo chassis to see what we're going to do with that there. And then we got a Kershaw chassis to see what we can do with it over there. Already got the center part out, the skid plate for the front bulkhead. Alrighty, remove the rear skid plate and the center skid plate. Got that front bumper already off, exposing a little bit. Same thing as the first Revo, with one screw basically take the whole front bumper off. Shocks removed, kind of the same as the old Revo where you remove it from the post and the mount. Remove the top half already, but the whole front bulkhead and steering assembly, kind of like the first Revo, but you have to actually remove the bell crank from the servo arms. So far it appears that this part right here on the older chassis has to be removed or ground down in some way, shape, or form to fit the new bulkhead. Not to mention, according to the new bulkhead, if you see it doesn't exactly sit as flush as the old one used to. But here's kind of a good look at what the new bulkhead really looks like. So far the screw holes do appear to bolt up in the exact same location as they did on the V1. Okay, I threw a wrench where the original mount was in the V1 to see if it lines up. And it technically does line up with the new bulkhead. So everything's looking good so far. It appears that the new mount and rear brace, that there's these new screw holes right here and here. As for the mount, it looked like it was pretty much in the exact same location. Same with this screw that was on the original Revo. As you can see, there's the holes from the new mount. And brace. Alright, shocks are removed. And it does appear that they use the same post as they did in version 1, but I wonder if they're the aluminum or the steel ones, because the aluminum ones I had a big hard time with once I got the aluminum bulkheads. Okay, I got everything off. The rear bumper basically comes off the same like it did in the V1. New bulkhead definitely looks a lot more beefier than the old one. It does have that extremely raised section, which they didn't have in the version 1. I mean, they did, but it was definitely a lot smaller compared to the old one. From the new, bigger case, I want to say. But so far, everything definitely looks like it lines about the same up. And just like the front, it's going to have all this probably sanded down or ground down, whatever you want to do with it. Considering the whole top of this thing is pretty much flush other than the fact of having that raised part for the case and the bulkhead itself. Now this is one of the newer things that was not on the original Revo. This new little locking screw thing on the back to hold them bottom pins, instead of being held by the rear bumper bracket. Alright, now after lining everything up with the old chassis, even the mount screws do appear to line up the same. So if you were to do some form of conversion, you'd have to use the older brace for it, because the new brace needs those new 4 holes being used for. But it's really close. Don't get me wrong. You could probably get away with, on the new one, maybe screwing in here. But as for having the new plastic right there versus the old one, it's not going to happen. But technically you might only need those 2 screws. And honestly, I'm rather happy that I still have one of the old bulkheads that technically is ready for a loci swap, which it's in there, it's mounted, it's ready to go. But I'm going to have to tear this bad boy apart and get the silicone out of here that held it in place and peel some of it off to compare the loci diff to the new Revo diff. And just as a mental note, or a side note, the turnbuckle size is just way bigger on the newer Revo. Not to mention the rod ends are way bigger on the new Revo. All the way around, every single one that I can see. It does appear that the pins that are in the new Revo are pretty much the same as the old Revo. But just the fact that they put 6 really good screws, it appears, on the bottom of this thing to get the top and bottom mounted together like they do, they really did spend some good time in engineering and design to get it relatively close from a good thing to a much stronger, durable thing. Not to mention, just in case anybody was wondering, the center shafts are almost about the same size. The plastic ones that they have in this thing are pretty much the same size as the old one. And now looking it over, they definitely don't have the boots that the original ones had. Not to mention, those of you that were wondering, these diff cups compared to the old diff cups that were in the Traxxas Revo breakup kit, these things, those are like the equivalent of like a 3/4 the size the old ones were, meets these new ones. Not to mention the depth is just like double of what the old one was. I mean, it's ridiculous in size difference. And like everybody was wondering, this is the new Revo diff. 2 different size bearings, oops. 2 different size bearings, a smaller one in front that goes into the case, reattached with the cups. Comes right out rather nice and smooth. It's a real deep grooved gear in there versus the original Revo. I mean, extremely deep, like bigger than almost Mod 1, closer to Mod 1.5. Just to give a little side-by-side comparison to a regular stock Revo, it is definitely no joke that much bigger. And the depth of the gears. Not to mention, for instance, this is a stock Revo diff, like the spiral gear that actually goes, the drive gear, that goes from the center shaft to the drive shaft, or the diff itself. And just in case those of you that were wondering, this is a loci diff swap that's sitting right here, and this gear is bigger than even the case of a loci swap. I mean, in all honesty, with a side-by-side comparison, this thing's massive compared to a loci. Just the cup itself is about the size of the case of a Losi swap diff case. Here it is opened up. I definitely like the gasket. It does remind me of a Losi or even Arma with the gasket. But I mean, just that gear itself is definitely bigger than the actual Losi was. But as for these little tiny little spider gears, they are a really deep cut, definitely deeper than the Losis. As you can see, the gear down there is about the same, obviously the same size as the one that's over here. I am rather impressed. They definitely did their homework this time. It appears to be about the exact same design as a Losi, but as you can see, the spiders are a lot smaller than a Losi. Now, like I said a little bit earlier, Traxxas definitely knew what they were doing when they did this, because here's a side-by-side comparison with the Losi diff that I tore apart. Here's the side-by-side comparison that the Sun gear is just ridiculously huge. The depth alone on that center gear is about the same, I want to say. But as for like this gear, the drive gear that's in the center, that's going to go to your drive line, hands down, versus a Losi, it's way bigger, and not to mention way deeper cut. As for both of them too, like here's that side-by-side comparison again of the depth of the cut. I mean, it's not even comparable. If the Losi is considered an 8th scale, this has to be every bit of 7, maybe even 6, I'd want to say. Now, as for the spider gears, compared side by side, spider gears, like I said, on the Traxxas is definitely a lot smaller and deeper cut than the Losis, but not by much. Now, they both use the same design where the center rods have a notch in them where they line up together, and still have the little sliders for the corners or the ends of the rods. It appears that it probably comes with every bit of like anywhere from 50 to 70 weight stock, and it actually has fluid in it, unlike the original revo brushless diffs. Not to mention, one last thing to mention there is that center bearing, the one closer to the diff, is about the size of a Losi one, but the smaller one, I want to say it's about the size of a regular revo wheel bearing. And while I'm at it, I might as well do a side-by-side comparison of these new monster axles versus a regular MIPs. I mean, the MIPs are almost the same size, but I want to say it's every bit of at least a mil smaller. And here's a side-by-side comparison of the new carrier versus the old carrier. And in case any of you were wondering, it basically is the same size as an RPM carrier. But I also could be stand corrected, because the bearing definitely looks a lot bigger in the newer one than an RPM replacement oversized bearing. But it's mainly the center from what I can tell, maybe another mil bigger on the outside. But there you guys have it, a brand new unboxed eRevo 2.0, tore down to see what's swappable in the comparison between some of the biggest and greatest hitters, meaning the Losi diff. That was the greatest swap that we had for our V1s. There's a really good chance with some slight modification that the bulkhead will fit the old chassis with a little slight modification of the chassis itself. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. Once these parts start rolling, we can probably do this. I mean, other than that, I mean, that fit perfectly, is interchangeable. It appeared that the front bumper is interchangeable, the rear bumper is interchangeable, all that's attached to it is interchangeable. The brace is definitely, the rear brace is definitely not one of the things that's going to be interchangeable. But if you don't want all 4 screws to technically mount, it's rather interchangeable with a little drill time and a little bit of tapping and threading in your plastic chassis. But yeah, I had to be the first tool to sit there and get this brand new right out the box. Didn't even run the thing. I mean, look at these tires, they still got the styrofoam on it. Come on. But yeah, the new shocks, the aluminum shocks, definitely look where it's at. It's definitely the same though. I mean, they're still using plastic ends and on both sides, plastic caps from what I can see. Everything other than that pretty much the same. I'm yet to tear apart the new transmission and everything to see what's really going on in there with the new center diff, but I'll save that for another video, considering this thing right here is just about 10 seconds short of being 16 minutes long. I hope this lets people know and put a little bit of pep in everybody's step, knowing that there's a really good chance that a lot of this is going to be interchangeable. As for the skid plate, it's definitely possible as well. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this answers a lot of the questions that people have been having for a good amount of time. I know, for one, was one of the people that was definitely wondering how all this works out. Hopefully it worked. It's definitely some light at the end of the tunnel for all you guys. Thank you, and have a nice day.